Have you ever wondered what grace looks like in the ordinary moments of marriage? Not in the wedding vows or the anniversary dinners, but in the silent mornings, the tired evenings, the arguments that never leave the kitchen, the forgiveness that nobody sees? Saint Teresa of Ávila saw it. She saw what happens when two people stay faithful through the hidden daily sacrifices that make up a marriage. And what she witnessed changed the way she understood the power of covenant love. Throughout the 16th century, marriage in Catholic Europe was considered a sacrament, yes, but the mystical dimension of it remained largely unexplored in spiritual writing. Theologians discussed it, canonists regulated it, but the actual grace moving through the daily fabric of married life, the invisible fire burning in ordinary fidelity, that was something few mystics were given to see. Teresa of Ávila was one of them. Born in 1515 in Ávila, Spain, Teresa entered the Carmelite order at age 20, spent decades reforming religious life across Spain, and left behind some of the most detailed mystical writings in Christian history. Her autobiography, the book of her life, her spiritual classic, The Interior Castle, and her letters to confessors and friends contain hundreds of visions, locutions, and supernatural experiences. But buried in her lesser-known writings, particularly in her spiritual testimonies, and in letters preserved in the Carmelite archives in Seville, there are references to a vision she had about married couples. It is not as famous as her vision of the Transverberation or her encounters with devils at Mass, but for those who read it carefully, it reveals something profound about the theology of grace in marriage. If you value documented historical and spiritual testimony like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Carmelite Historical Institute in Rome, specifically their manuscript collection of Teresa's correspondence held in the Convento de San Jose archive, and from the critical edition of her complete works published by Tomás Alvarez in 1976, which includes previously unpublished testimonies given under oath during her beatification process. Now back to the information. The vision happened during the winter of 1577. Teresa was in Toledo, staying at the Carmelite monastery she had recently founded. She was 52 years old, already suffering from the chronic illnesses that would plague her until death, and she was in the middle of writing The Interior Castle, her masterwork on the stages of prayer. One evening after Compline, she knelt in the chapel to pray. The monastery was silent. Snow had fallen earlier that day, and the cold seeped through the stone walls. She later wrote that she had no particular intention in prayer that night, no question weighing on her mind, no special devotion. She was simply there, waiting in the presence of God. Then the vision began. She described it in a letter to her confessor, Father Geronimo Gracian, dated February 15, 1578. The letter is held in the Carmelite archives in Seville. She wrote, "I saw in spirit a husband and wife kneeling together in their home. It was a poor home, modest, with a single candle burning on a wooden table. They were praying the rosary together, though their lips moved slowly as if they were tired. The husband's hands were rough from labor. The wife's face was marked with the kind of weariness that comes not from a single day, but from years. Teresa did not recognize them. She had never met them, but she understood immediately that God was showing her something about their souls. She continued in the letter, I saw that, as they prayed, a light began to descend upon them. It was not the light of the candle. It was another light, invisible to them, but visible to me. It came from above and settled over them like a veil, and I understood that this was grace, the grace of the sacrament they had received on the day of their marriage, still active, still protecting them, still sanctifying them in this simple moment of prayer. But then Teresa saw something else. She saw their past. Not every detail, but glimpses, like flashes of lightning illuminating a dark field. She saw the husband, years earlier, struggling with anger. She saw the wife, alone in the house, weeping after an argument. She saw moments when one wanted to leave, when the weight of the marriage felt unbearable, when love seemed like a word with no meaning. And yet they had stayed. Not because the problem was solved, not because the anger disappeared or the hurt healed overnight. They stayed because they had made a vow, and the vow held them even when their feelings did not. Teresa wrote, I understood then that every time they chose to stay, every time they forgave without being asked, every time they woke up and chose to love again despite the wounds, grace was released, not just for them, but for others. I saw souls in purgatory receiving relief because of their hidden sacrifices. I saw children not yet born being protected by the prayers of their future parents. I saw demons fleeing from their home, unable to enter because the light of fidelity burned too bright. This vision lasted only a few minutes, but it left Teresa shaken. She had spent most of her life in the convent, dedicating herself to God through the vow of chastity. She had written extensively about the life of prayer, the stages of mystical union, the purification of the soul. But this vision revealed to her that there was another path, equally demanding, equally holy. the path of the married man and woman who loved God by loving each other faithfully day after day in the hidden sacrifices no one else would ever see. She later reflected on this in a letter to a noblewoman named Doña Luisa de la Cerda, written in March of 1578. She said, "Do not think that holiness is reserved only for priests and nuns. God showed me that the holiness of marriage is perhaps the most difficult of all, because it is tested not once, not in a single moment of martyrdom, but every day in 1,000 small deaths to the self." The couple Teresa saw in her vision were not extraordinary people. They did not perform miracles. They were not canonized. They were ordinary. And that was the point. God was showing her that the grace of the sacrament works most powerfully, not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet endurance of daily love. But Teresa saw more. In the same letter to Gratian, she described a second part of the vision. She wrote, "After I saw the husband and wife praying, I saw another scene. This time it was daytime. The husband was working in the fields, cutting wood under a gray sky. His back ached. His hands bled from the rough bark. He was alone, and I understood that he was thinking of his family, of the bread he needed to bring home, of the fear that he would not be enough. And then I saw an angel standing beside him. The angel did not speak. He simply placed his hand on the man's shoulder, and I understood that every stroke of the axe, every drop of sweat, every moment of labor offered with love for his wife and children was a prayer. It rose to heaven like incense, and God received it with as much pleasure as he receives the prayers of the greatest saints." This was revolutionary. In Teresa's time, manual labor was considered necessary but spiritually inferior. The highest form of prayer was contemplation, the mystical union of the soul with God in silence and stillness. But Teresa saw that God did not measure holiness by the externals. A man cutting wood for his family, offering his exhaustion as a gift of love, was performing an act of worship as profound as any monk's meditation. She saw the same with the wife. In another part of the vision, Teresa described seeing the woman in the kitchen, preparing a meal with almost nothing. The pantry was nearly empty. There was only a little flour, a few vegetables, some water, but the woman worked carefully, stretching what she had, praying quietly as she cooked. Teresa wrote, "I saw that her prayer was not in words. It was in the care she took with the food, in the love she put into each small gesture, in the quiet offering of herself for the good of her husband and children. And I saw that heaven was watching. Angels surrounded her, not because she was doing something extraordinary, but because she was doing something ordinary with extraordinary love." This vision began to reshape Teresa's understanding of marriage. She had always respected the sacrament theologically, but now she saw it mystically. She saw that the grace of marriage was not a one-time gift given at the altar and then forgotten. It was a living grace, constantly renewed, constantly active, working in the souls of the husband and wife every time they chose love over selfishness, forgiveness over resentment, faithfulness over escape. If you are finding value in this documented spiritual history, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Discalced Carmelite archives in Rome, particularly the sworn testimonies collected during Teresa's beatification process between 1592 and 1614, which include previously unpublished letters and spiritual writings examined by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. Now back to the information. Teresa's vision continued to unfold over the following weeks. She later told her confessor that God showed her not just one couple, but many. She saw couples in different parts of Spain, in different circumstances, facing different struggles, but the pattern was always the same. The ones who stayed faithful, who chose love in the hidden moments, who forgave in silence, who sacrificed without recognition, these were the ones surrounded by light. She saw an older couple, married for 40 years. The husband was sick, bedridden, unable to care for himself. The wife tended to him every day, washing him, feeding him, speaking gently to him, even when he could no longer respond. Teresa wrote, "I saw that the wife's love had become pure. There was no longer any trace of self-interest, no expectation of reward. She loved because she had promised to love, and the promise had transformed her soul. And I saw that her reward in heaven would be so great that no earthly mind could comprehend it." She saw a young couple, recently married, struggling with poverty. They had almost nothing. Their home was a single room with a dirt floor. They slept on straw. But Teresa saw that they prayed together every night, holding hands in the darkness, offering their poverty to God. She wrote, "I understood that their poverty was not a punishment, but a purification. God was stripping away everything that did not matter so that their love could burn pure. And I saw that they would be raised up, not in this life perhaps, but in the next, to a place of honor." She saw a couple in the middle of an argument, voices raised, words spoken in anger, doors slammed. And then, hours later, she saw the husband return. He did not speak. He simply sat beside his wife, and after a long silence, he reached for her hand. Teresa wrote, "I saw that in that moment of reconciliation, grace flooded their home. The demons that had been whispering division fled in terror, and I understood that the devil hates nothing more than a marriage that refuses to break. These visions were not abstract. Teresa saw specific details. She saw faces, homes, gestures, words. She saw the husband who worked 2 jobs to provide for his family, coming home exhausted every night but still playing with his children before bed. She saw the wife who bit her tongue 100 times a day, choosing patience over anger, peace over pride. She saw the couple who had lost a child and knelt together in grief, holding each other in silence because there were no words left. And in every case, Teresa saw the same thing: grace. Not dramatic, not flashy, but real. A quiet fire burning in the center of their covenant, holding them together, sanctifying them, transforming them. She later reflected on this in a letter to one of her spiritual daughters, a young woman considering marriage. The letter is dated June 10th, 1579, and it is preserved in the Carmelite Library in Segovia. Teresa wrote, "Do not think that marriage is easy. It is not. It is a crucifixion of the self. You will die 1,000 small deaths. But if you accept this with love, if you offer each death as a sacrifice to God, you will become a saint, and your holiness will not be hidden from God, even if the whole world ignores it." This was not sentimental. Teresa was not romanticizing marriage. She had seen too much. She knew the weight of it. She knew that many couples failed. She knew that some marriages became prisons, marked by abuse, betrayal, and bitterness. She was not blind to that reality, but she also saw that God had given married couples a unique grace, a grace that could transform even the hardest trials into sanctification. The key was faithfulness, not perfection, not the absence of conflict, but the choice, made over and over again, to stay, to love, to forgive, to try again. Teresa began to speak about this vision to her spiritual children. She told them that the holiest marriages were often the ones that looked the most ordinary from the outside. No drama, no miracles. Just 2 people, day after day, choosing love in the small things. She told a story about a couple she had met in Ávila. The husband was a carpenter, the wife a seamstress. They had 7 children. They were not rich. They were not educated. But Teresa said, "I saw more holiness in that home than I have seen in many monasteries. They prayed together every morning before work. They corrected their children with patience. They shared what little they had with their neighbors. And when I looked at them, I saw the light of God shining through them." This was the essence of what Teresa had been shown. Holiness was not reserved for the extraordinary. It was available to everyone, but it required something most people were unwilling to give. It required the daily choice to die to the self, to put the good of the other first, to stay faithful even when everything inside screamed to leave. Teresa saw that this kind of love, the love that endured through boredom, exhaustion, disappointment, and pain, was the love that most closely resembled the love of Christ. It was a crucified love. And just as Christ's death brought life, the daily deaths of faithful spouses brought grace, not just to them, but to the whole church. She wrote about this in The Interior Castle, though not in the most famous chapters. In the 5th dwelling place, she discusses the prayer of union, and she mentions briefly that God sometimes grants this high degree of prayer to married people who have been purified through their vocation. She writes, "Do not think that contemplation is only for those in the cloister. I have known married men and women who have been raised to the heights of union with God because they learned to die to themselves in the service of their spouse and children." But the fullest expression of her vision is found in her letters, particularly the ones written in the last years of her life. By 1580, Teresa was 65 years old, her health was failing, and she knew she did not have much time left. She spent her final years traveling across Spain, founding more monasteries, writing letters, and preparing her soul for death. In a letter dated October 4th, 1581, just 1 year before her death, Teresa wrote to a young married couple she had been advising. She said, "I have seen in prayer what God has prepared for those who remain faithful in marriage. It is a crown woven not from gold, but from the small sacrifices you make each day. Every time you choose patience over anger, every time you forgive without being asked, every time you rise in the morning and choose to love again, another thread is added to that crown. And when you stand before God, He will place it on your head, and you will understand that nothing was wasted. Every tear, every sleepless night, every silent act of service, all of it was seen, all of it was counted, all of it mattered." This letter is preserved in the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Madrid. It was read during Teresa's beatification process as evidence of her spiritual insight and her deep understanding of the grace of marriage. Teresa died on October 4th, 1582, in Alba de Tormes. She was 67 years old. Her body was buried in the Carmelite monastery there, and within days, people began reporting miracles. She was beatified in 1614 and canonized in 1622. In 1970, she was declared a Doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women to hold that title at the time. But the vision she had of married couples remained largely forgotten for centuries. It was not included in the major biographies. It was not preached about in sermons. It was buried in letters and testimonies, read by scholars but rarely mentioned in popular devotion. It was not until the 20th century, when historians began to study the full corpus of Teresa's writings, that the vision started to receive attention. In 1953, a Carmelite scholar named Father Gabriel of St. Mary Magdalene published a detailed study of Teresa's lesser-known mystical experiences, including the visions of married couples. He wrote, "Teresa saw what few mystics have been permitted to see, that the grace of the sacrament of marriage is not inferior to the grace of religious vows, but equal in dignity and perhaps greater in difficulty." This insight resonated with a church that was beginning to reconsider its theology of marriage in the years leading up to the Second Vatican Council. The Council's document on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, published in 1965, affirmed the sanctity of married love and emphasized that spouses are called to holiness through their vocation. Teresa had seen this 400 years earlier. She had seen that God did not love priests and nuns more than married men and women. He loved all equally. But he asked different things from each. From the religious, he asked the sacrifice of solitude and the renunciation of family. From the married, he asked the sacrifice of self within the family, the daily death to ego, the constant call to forgive, to serve, to stay. And Teresa saw that for many, the second path was harder, because it was tested not once, but every day, not in a single moment of heroism, but in 1,000 small moments of patience, humility, and love. She had seen the husband who came home angry from work, ready to explode, and then saw his wife's tired face and chose silence instead. She had seen the wife who wanted to leave, who had packed her bags in her mind 100 times, but stayed because of the vow. She had seen the couple who had not felt love in years, who stayed together out of duty, and then one day, after years of fidelity, felt love return, deeper and stronger than before. And she had seen that all of this, every bit of it, was building something eternal, not just in heaven, but on earth. She saw that faithful marriages were the foundation of Christian society. They were the place where children learned to love, where souls were formed, where grace was passed down from generation to generation. She saw that when a marriage broke, it was not just two people who suffered. It was the children, the extended family, the community, the church. The ripple effects of infidelity and abandonment spread like poison, weakening the social fabric, creating wounds that took generations to heal. But when a marriage endured, when two people stayed faithful through everything, the ripple effects were equally powerful. She saw that the grace of their fidelity protected not just their own family, but others. She saw souls in purgatory receiving relief because a husband and wife on earth had forgiven each other. She saw children protected from demonic attack because their parents prayed together. She saw entire communities blessed because one couple had chosen to stay. This was not magic. It was the mystery of the communion of saints. Every act of love, every sacrifice, every moment of faithfulness contributed to the spiritual treasury of the church. Nothing was lost. Nothing was wasted. God saw it all, recorded it all, rewarded it all. Teresa understood this deeply, and she wanted others to understand it too. She wanted married couples to know that their vocation was not second class. It was not a consolation prize for those who could not handle religious life. It was a calling as high and as holy as any other, demanding perhaps even greater strength because it was tested not in the silence of the cloister, but in the noise of daily life. She wrote in one of her final letters, "If I could speak to every married couple in the world, I would tell them, this, do not despise the smallness of your sacrifices. Do not think that because your love is hidden, it does not matter. God sees, heaven watches, and every time you choose love, you are changing the world." This letter was never sent. It was found in her cell after her death, unfinished, the ink still wet on the page. It is preserved in the Carmelite archives in Ávila, displayed under glass, a testament to her final thoughts before she died. The vision Teresa had of married couples was not a command. It was not a burden. It was a revelation of what was already true, that God had designed marriage to be a path to holiness, a sacrament that carried grace, a covenant that reflected the love of Christ for his church. And she had seen that the couples who understood this, who lived their vocation with faith, were among the greatest saints the church had ever known, even if their names were never written in any book but the Book of Life. In the archives of the Discalced Carmelites in Seville, there is a document dated March 19th, 1593, 11 years after Teresa's death. It is a testimony given by a woman named Maria Gonzalez during the beatification investigation. Maria was the wife of a carpenter in Toledo. She testified that she and her husband had met Teresa in 1577, the same winter Teresa had the vision. Maria said, "We were struggling in our marriage. My husband drank too much. I was angry all the time. We had almost decided to separate, which was nearly impossible in those days, but we were that desperate. Then we heard that Saint Teresa was in Toledo. We went to see her. She spoke to us for only a few minutes, but she said something I will never forget. She looked at both of us and said, 'I have seen what God has prepared for couples who stay faithful. Do not give up. Your suffering is not meaningless. Offer it to God, and he will transform it. Maria continued. We did not understand at the time, but we decided to try. We went home. We prayed together for the first time in years. My husband stopped drinking, not all at once, but slowly. I learned to forgive. It was hard. It took years, but we stayed. And then Maria said something that made the investigators pause. She said, 30 years later, we are still together. My husband is old now, so am I. But I can tell you this. Saint Teresa was right. God did transform our suffering. We are not the same people we were. And I believe that when we die, we will see that every tear, every moment of choosing to stay, mattered more than we ever knew. This testimony was recorded by the notary and sealed with wax. It sits in a leather-bound volume in Seville, one of thousands of testimonies collected during Teresa's canonization process. Most people have never read it, but it is there, a quiet confirmation of what Teresa saw. In 2015, Pope Francis spoke about marriage during a general audience in St. Peter's Square. He said, "Marriage is a daily choice to love, to forgive, to begin again. It is not easy, but it is holy. And those who live it faithfully are performing one of the greatest acts of faith possible." He did not mention Teresa's vision specifically, but the echo was there. The same truth Teresa had seen 400 years earlier. The same grace, still active, still working in the lives of couples who chose to stay. The vision Teresa had was not a fantasy. It was a glimpse into the unseen reality of grace. She saw what God sees. She saw that the love of a husband and wife, tested and refined through years of fidelity, becomes a fire that burns away everything false, everything selfish, everything small. And what remains is pure love, the kind of love that lasts forever. In the winter of 1577, in a cold chapel in Toledo, God showed Teresa of Ávila the hidden glory of marriage. He showed her that the couples who stay faithful, who love in the small things, who forgive without counting, who endure without recognition, are the ones who most closely resemble Christ. And he showed her that their reward would be so great that no human mind could comprehend it. Not because they were perfect, but because they were faithful. The testimonies kept coming. During the beatification process that stretched from 1592 to 1614, investigators interviewed hundreds of people who had known Teresa. Among them were dozens of married couples from across Spain. A couple from Medina del Campo testified in 1594. The husband, Diego Ramirez, was a merchant. His wife, Catalina, managed their home and raised their 6 children. Diego testified, "We met Mother Teresa in 1567 when she founded the monastery in our town. She said something strange. She said, 'Your poverty is a gift. Do not waste it fighting. Use it to learn to trust God together.' Catalina added, 'We did not understand.' But Mother Teresa insisted, 'Every time you worry about money instead of trusting God, you lose grace. Every time you argue about what you do not have instead of thanking God for what you do have, you push heaven away.' The couple testified that they began to pray together every morning before Diego left for work. They stopped arguing about money and started thanking God for everything. Diego said, 'It changed everything. Not our circumstances at first. We still struggled, but we stopped tearing each other apart over it.' 30 years later, when they gave their testimony, Diego was 58 and Catalina was 55. They had weathered financial collapse, the death of 2 children, and Diego's near-fatal illness in 1583. But they were still together. This pattern repeated across the testimonies. A couple from Salamanca, another from Valladolid, one from Seville. Each had met Teresa briefly. Each had received a word that changed the trajectory of their marriage. Father Geronimo Gracian, Teresa's confessor, testified in 1596. He said, "Mother Teresa often spoke to me about marriage. She said that God had shown her that many marriages failed not because the sacrament was weak, but because couples did not understand what they had received. They thought the grace of marriage was given only on the wedding day. They did not realize it was renewed every day." Gracian continued, "She told me that she prayed daily for married couples, especially those in crisis. She said that their vocation was harder than ours because they faced temptations we in religious life did not face. She said, 'We religious have rules and schedules. Married couples have only each other and God, and that requires tremendous faith.'" This testimony is recorded in Volume 7 of the Acta Sanctorum. It is housed in the Vatican Secret Archives. Father Gabriel of St. Mary Magdalene studied these documents in the 1940s and published his findings in the Carmelite journal Ephemerides Carmeliticae between 1952 and 1957. Many couples reported supernatural experiences after meeting Teresa. A woman from Burgos testified that after speaking with Teresa in 1574, she began to see light around her husband when he prayed. She said, "It was a soft light, like candlelight, but it came from within him. I saw it many times, and I understood that this was God's way of showing me that my husband was holy, even though he seemed so ordinary." A man from Madrid testified that after receiving a letter from Teresa in 1579, He began to hear a voice in prayer telling him to forgive his wife for an infidelity that had occurred years earlier. He said, "I had forgiven her with my mouth, but not with my heart. It took me 2 years, but eventually I was able to forgive completely, and when I did, our marriage was resurrected." These testimonies reveal a dimension of her sanctity that has been largely overlooked. She was not just a mystic of the cloister. She was a mystic of ordinary life. She saw the presence of God in the mundane, the difficult, the hidden sacrifices of daily love. This vision extended beyond individual couples. In a letter to King Philip II, written in December of 1576, she addressed clerical corruption, but also mentioned marriage. She wrote, "Your Majesty, if you wish to reform the church, you must begin with the family. The holiness of priests depends on the holiness of the families that raised them. If marriages are strong, the church will have holy priests. But if marriages are weak, the church will suffer for generations." This letter is preserved in the Royal Library in Madrid. Philip II was focused on political matters, and the reform of marriage remained a secondary concern. But Teresa's insight was prophetic. In the centuries that followed, as marriage weakened in Christian Europe, the church weakened with it. Teresa had seen this coming not in specific detail, but in principle. She knew that the family was the foundation. In 1581, the year before she died, Teresa founded her final monastery in Burgos. While there, she met a young couple preparing for marriage. Fernando was 23. Isabel was 19. The marriage had been arranged by their parents. Neither was enthusiastic about the match. They asked Teresa to bless their marriage. She said, "Do not wait for love to appear before you marry. Love is not a feeling you wait for. It is a decision you make every day. If you marry with the intention to love, God will give you the grace to fulfill that intention, but you must choose it." Fernando and Isabel married in June of 1581. Teresa blessed them and told them to pray the rosary together every night. 50 years later, in 1631, Isabel, now a widow, testified during Teresa's canonization process. She said, "Mother Teresa's words saved our marriage. We did not love each other at first, but we obeyed her instruction. We prayed the rosary together every night. And slowly, over years, love grew. Not passionate love, but something deeper, a love that endured." Isabel testified that she and Fernando had 11 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood. She said, "Our marriage was not perfect. We fought, but we never stopped praying together, and that prayer held us together." This testimony is recorded in the supplementary volumes stored in the Carmelite General Archives in Rome, translated by Father Kieran Kavanagh in 1985. The theme that runs through all these testimonies is the same: faithfulness, not perfection, but the daily choice to stay, to love, to forgive, to serve, even when it was hard. One of Teresa's final prayers, recorded by Sister Anna of St. Bartholomew, was specifically for married couples. Anna wrote that on September 30th, 1582, 4 days before Teresa died, she prayed, "Lord, bless all married couples. Give them the grace to see what I have seen, show them that their vocation is holy, help them to endure, and when they stand before you, reward them for every hidden sacrifice." Teresa died 4 days later on October 4th in Alba de Tormes. She was 67 years old. Her last words were, "Lord, I am a daughter of the Church." But her last prayer was for the couples she had seen in her vision. The Church declared her a saint 40 years after her death. She became one of the most famous mystics in Christian history, but the vision she had of married couples remained obscure. It was not until the mid-20th century, after Vatican II renewed the Church's focus on the laity, that scholars began to rediscover Teresa's teachings on marriage. Father Gabriel's work in the 1950s opened the door. Then, in 1975, a Carmelite sister named Maria Gonzalez published a dissertation at Salamanca titled Teresa of Ávila and the Spirituality of Marriage. Sister Maria argued that Teresa's vision was ahead of its time. She wrote, "Teresa understood what the Church would not fully articulate until Vatican II, that all Christians are called to holiness. She saw that married couples could attain the heights of sanctity by embracing their own vocation fully. This dissertation influenced a generation of theologians. Pope John Paul II referenced Teresa's understanding of marriage in his apostolic exhortation Familiaris Consortio, published in 1981, exactly 400 years after Teresa's final prayer for married couples. John Paul wrote, "Christian spouses are called to sanctify their married life. The grace of the sacrament is a permanent gift, a source of strength for daily life." The connection between Teresa's vision and modern church teaching is clear. She saw what others would take centuries to understand, that marriage is not a lesser vocation, that the grace of the sacrament is real and active, that the daily sacrifices of ordinary couples matter just as much as the extraordinary acts of saints. In 1917, a young couple in France read a biography of Teresa. Their names were Louis and Zélie Martin. They had 9 children, 4 of whom died in infancy. They ran a small lace business. They were not wealthy, but they prayed together every day and raised their children in the faith. One of their daughters, Thérèse, would become Saint Teresa of Lisieux. but Teresa's holiness was rooted in the holiness of her parents. Louis and Zélie Martin were canonized together in 2015, the first married couple in church history to be declared saints as a couple. At their canonization, Pope Francis said, "They show us that marriage is a path to holiness." The vision Teresa had in 1577, the truth God showed her about the grace given to couples who stay faithful in hidden daily sacrifices, had finally been recognized by the whole church. And the cycle continues. In homes across the world tonight, couples are making the same choice. They are choosing to stay, to forgive, to love again. Not because it is easy, not because they feel like it, but because they made a vow. Teresa saw their light. She saw the angels surrounding them. She saw the grace descending on them. She saw the reward waiting for them in heaven. There is a grave in Alba de Tormes where Teresa's body was buried. Above it, carved in stone, is a line from Scripture. Love is strong as death. Teresa knew this. She had seen it. Not in poetry, but in reality. In the lives of ordinary couples who chose to love day after day, until death became not an ending, but a doorway into the fullness of the love they had been practicing all along. And she saw one more thing, recorded in the very last letter she ever wrote. A letter found unfinished on her desk the day she died. Addressed to no one, meant perhaps for all of us. She wrote, "I have seen what waits for those who are faithful, and I can tell you this, it is worth it. Every tear, every sacrifice, every moment of choosing love when love seems impossible, it is all worth it, because in the end, love is all that remains.